everybody, my name is Jo and I love to read. Today I'm going to be doing a discussion video about the romantic interests in the Earth's Children series by Jean M Auel. These are just going to be the romantic interests of the main character or the protagonist, Ayla, throughout the series, and I'm going to be talking about 3 of them. Now there is going to be spoilers going forward at this point for the entire Earth's Children series from books 1 to 6, all of them, so proceed with caution if you don't want to be spoiled. And I'm going to be talking about Brookerville, Reinek, and of course Dela. So you might be wondering, if you've read the series and know who Brookerville is, why I'm deciding to include him in this video, because Ayla doesn't actually have a relationship with him, but it's more that I find his character, well, one, fascinating, but also because I felt like there is the potential for something to be explored between those two if that had been part of the plot. It wasn't, but I feel like there was potential. The Earth's Children series is set in prehistoric times and it features 2 different types of humans, the Neanderthal, which are sometimes also referred to as the Clan, and the Cro-Magnons, which are referred to as the Others. So because we're in like narrative in this series, they don't call themselves Neanderthals or Cro-Magnons, they call themselves either the Clan or the Others, but I will be using the scientific terms just to keep things simple. And it is worth noting that Cro-Magnons is not a term that is used anymore. As science has evolved, the Cro-Magnons are now called early or anatomically modern humans. Brookerville is a character that's introduced in the 5th and also shown in the 6th book of the series. We get to meet him as Ayla is meeting Dela's community for the first time. So Dela, just a brief introduction, is Ayla's main romantic interest for the entire series, and he is wanting to take Ayla back to his people in the last 2 books of the series, which is when we meet Brookerville, because he's a part of that community called the Zelendoni. Based on his appearance, the community believes that Brookerville is descended from Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons. Since in the Zelendoni communities, Neanderthals are looked down as lesser people, this causes a lot of emotional trauma for Brookerville because he desperately wants to fit in but never can because of his appearance. It's a constant reminder to himself and everybody else around him that he's different, and unfortunately in this time, like, you know, many other things that are going on in our time now, being different is apparently horrible to a lot of people and he's never able to fit in properly. However, when he's introduced to Ayla for the first time, she treats him with her usual friendliness and kindness, which is nothing more than her usual politeness that she engages with everybody. But for Brookerville, someone who was so starved of that kind of attention, he falls deeply infatuated with her. And Ayla treats him this way because as I've described to you, we're in a society where the majority of people don't see Neanderthals as human. They refer to them often as animals. Ayla is someone who was orphaned from her Cro-Magnon parents at a very, very young age, and thus she ends up growing up with a clan, a group of Neanderthals, and thus sees a lot of Neanderthal characteristics as attractive due to her heritage, well, due to the way that she was brought up. However, because Ayla is a very honest and sometimes not subtle person, she's constantly reminds Brookerville, not in like conversation ways or anything, like she doesn't do it in like a way to try and be a pain in the butt. As I said, she's a really kind person, but just the way that she is, whenever they interact, they're sort of, he's constantly reminded of his suspected lineage, and this causes him to, even though further as the series goes on further, he becomes still enamored with Ayla, he also starts to be really angry whenever he sees her, and this is very conflicting for him because he on one hand loves her and wants to be with her, or he thinks that he loves her because he doesn't really know her, but he's so infatuated with her and wants to be with her. But on the other hand, he's also angry because he doesn't want to be what she is telling him he is. Because of all of this conflict and this discussion throughout the last 2 books, the brief time it is discussed, I find Brookerville a really fascinating character, and I found his potential could have been so cool. Like, had Ayla not been destined to end up with Dela, it would have been really interesting to see whether Brookerville and Ayla could have had a relationship and whether she could have helped him to heal. But also, even if they're not ending up together, she could have helped him heal as a friend and tried to make him realize that just because he may be descended from Neanderthals doesn't mean that he's any less of a person, and that a lot of the people in the Zelandoni are actually not very good people for judging the clan and the Neanderthals just based on their appearance and the way that they act, that they're actually worthwhile. So I was so disappointed that this wasn't explored, and I felt that he was such a fascinating character. And especially when John Dela does some shitty things in the later books, it would have been really interesting to have Ayla end up with Brookerville and to have that kind of richness in their relationship and their development from sort of this conflicted poor man who's just been bullied and harassed for his entire life to actually healing and being like a wonderful husband slash father. But alas, that is not to be, and a lot of my feelings with that is also reflected in the fact that I wish the last book could have dealt a lot more with the relationships between the Neanderthals and the Cro-Magnon communities, but perhaps that couldn't have been the way because Neanderthals eventually in real life they've died out, so it's not like Ayla could come in and save the race and help them to evolve. Like, that just wasn't what they were capable of as far as scientific knowledge knows at this point in time. But we still could have had a bit of a bittersweet ending where Ayla is trying to get those two to interact together, but for whatever reasons it just doesn't happen, and they do eventually, you know, you can kind of see how they are going to die out as opposed to the Cro-Magnons who eventually evolve onto Homo sapiens, which is what we are. And I just think that that would have been a much more interesting exploration of the series than John Dela cheating on her. But anyways, those are my thoughts on Brookerville as a character. I'm going to move on now to Ayla's second romantic interest, or second, it's not really in order, but the second one that I'm going to talk about, which is Reinek. Reinek is introduced and only featured in the third book as a rival to John Dela. He's an artist that's obsessed with pretty things, and when Ayla comes in, who is described as being a pure beauty even amongst the Cro-Magnons, he wants to possess it and wants to be with her, and sort of similar to Brookerville though in a less conflicted way, he is infatuated with her and really wants to get to know her, to be with her, to experience everything that she has to offer for him. Under the influence of alcohol at a festival one night, Ayla has sex with Reinek, and at this point in her relationship with John Dela, he is very upset and jealous and withdraws from her. And even though that we have learnt, and Ayla has learnt in this book, that people within the Cro-Magnon community sometimes do sleep with other people, it is not uncommon for a woman to have been mated to another man but then to sleep with someone else. They do talk about how there are some men that do get jealous and don't like that, but monogamy isn't as much of a big thing as it is in our culture, or at least in my culture. Yet John Dela is one of those men who just wants Ayla for himself, he just wants his woman for himself, but they didn't have that conversation, and Ayla, having grown up with the Neanderthals, is not very well versed in Cro-Magnon communities and cultures and societal norms, and so she sleeps with this other guy without really discussing it with John Dela, but they also don't discuss whether like that they want to be monogamous, so it's a bit of a like a murky situation where nobody's really the wrong person. This causes John Dela to be very distant from her, and she thinks, again, they're shitty with the communication, that he doesn't love her anymore, and so she actually accepts Reinek's proposal a couple of months later when she thinks that John Dela's feelings for her have gone away. Though, of course, at the end of the book, Ayla decides finally to lay it all on the line and tell John Dela how she feels at the risks of being heartbroken, and they end up together, effectively ending her relationship with Reinek, and then they leave the community where Reinek is to continue on to meet John Dela's family. There's nothing particularly wrong with Reinek as a character. I just think that he wasn't the right man for Ayla because he puts her up on a pedestal, and I feel like he doesn't actually love her for who she is as a whole person. He just loves her for her beauty and what he will be able to display as his mate and the mother of his children. So I wasn't actually disappointed that they broke up. And as we know, or as most people know, that putting people up on a pedestal isn't really a healthy relationship. I do wish Reinek all the best though. He does end up mating to a woman that he's already had a child with, and I sincerely hope that if it's available in that time, which is probably not, but if it is, he gets some therapy to realize that women are people and not just works of art to possess. And finally, we've got Dela, who is the main love interest and also the second protagonist in the series, because we do get points of view from his perspective. They meet in the second book of the series when they're both all alone, because Dela was on this big journey with his brother Thonolin, who at a part of the journey when they're traveling solo together, Thonolin is murdered, right, when it's an animal. He's killed by a lion, and Ayla saves Dela's life, though she can't save Thonolin, so they're together in a cave by themselves after Ayla has just left the Neanderthals to try and find her own people, because even though she does love the Neanderthals, it's not quite the same. She can't communicate them. Their sort of social differences are just too different for her. So after her adopted mother dies, she goes off to try and find some new people. I absolutely love the romance between Ayla and Dela in this second book. Like, watching them try to struggle to communicate with each other is just so sweet, and Ayla is just so like excited to have met someone that looks like her, but she doesn't know how to speak, and he's trying, like, he to begin with thinks that she's like a priestess in his society that has taken like a vow of silence, and so it's a wonderful slow burn romance in this book. But as the series progresses, we see what normally happens, which people that are sort of thrust together in a situation, when they come back into a society, it is a lot different to seeing how they interact when they've got other people and other thoughts and opinions around them. And then we get, as I said in the third book, Ayla sleeps with Reinek, Dela's upset, they don't communicate for a long time, and then finally they do, and they go off together. Then the fourth book, they spend traveling all by themselves. There's a lot of cute moments, but I really didn't enjoy that book a lot, so there's not much going on in there. But come the fifth and sixth book, they are introduced into Dela's Zelandoni society, they get married, have a kid, and then Ayla's job as a healer slash spiritual trainee blows up, and she has hardly any time at all, and so Dela ends up having an affair with a woman that he was once betrothed to named Morona. Up until this sixth book, I actually really enjoyed the romance between Dela and Ayla, even though the third book frustrated me because there is a lot of lack of communication and the push and pull, like the Ayla sleeping with someone else and the whole drama that infused from there was fine with me. It made sense. It was something that I could understand. But it did feel a little bit drawn out, where it took them just a little bit too long to end up finally communicating with each other. But what really frustrates me come the sixth book is that they've already learnt that they want to be monogamous with each other. They know that even though it's common in their society that people will have multiple partners or they'll swap partners, they themselves want to be monogamous. But Dela just decides, because he has needs that need to be met and Ayla isn't meeting them, instead of having a grown-up honest conversation with her and trying to find a way that they can spend more time together, or for him to deal with his urges in a more adult way, he ends up sleeping with his ex. And his ex, of all people that he doesn't have a good relationship with, he essentially nearly left her at the altar, goes away for 5 years, and then comes back with this beautiful woman, and his ex is still angry about it and is really awful to Ayla, even though she's a lovely person to her. Like, he picked the worst woman to end up with, well, not end up with, but he picked the worst person to sleep with, and it really, really disappointed me and upset me as a reader. So I'll leave a link up here to the reading vlog where I read this bit and cried my eyes out. I did feel personally that Auel degraded his character. I like to imagine an alternate universe where Dela doesn't do that, when he remembers the lesson that they learnt in the Mammoth Hunters, which is the third book, and decides not to be a child about his feelings and to actually express them like a grown-up. I do wonder, as I was preparing my notes for this video, whether Auel was showing the fact that life gets messy and hectic, and even though someone will have appeared to have learnt something in one part of their life, it doesn't mean that it's not going to get tested and they ultimately fail later on. I do understand that, and I have, like I said, doing this, have a deeper appreciation for this part in the book, but it doesn't mean that I wanted to read it, and it doesn't mean that I wanted Ayla to end up with Dela after he did this. Again, she could have explored the Brookerville thing. He could have been the partner that, like, she deserves. But probably what really frustrated me with the end of their relationship is that we get no real consequences for him, and we also don't get any real apology from him or the greater Zelandoni community that he did the wrong thing. Because yes, even though a lot of them weren't monogamous, they had decided as a couple to be monogamous, and so he did the wrong thing. He did cheat on her, and it's really frustrating that he never accepted it. She just takes him back because he saves her from like going into the spirit world when she's doing like this spiritual meditation, and he has to pull her back because they have this connection. It was just really frustrating, because if Auel wanted to make John Dela less perfect and less of a Mary Sue, then she could have spent the whole of the 6th book on it. I would have really liked to have seen a fair chunk of spiritual stuff at the start of the book to set up the premise that Ayla has a really difficult, in-depth career that is taking a lot of time. We could have seen their marriage start to suffer. And then, sure, have him sleep with Morona in the middle of the book, because that is what happens. People do cheat. That's a sad fact of life. But if you wanted them to still end up together as a couple, we needed to have spent a lot of the book with them developing their trust and relationship again, and Ayla admitting that yes, she got lost in a job that she didn't even really enjoy, but that also took up a lot of her time, and her family suffered because of it. But then too, yes, John Dela did the wrong thing. He should have talked to her about it, or he should have left her. He should not have slept with someone else while still pretending to be with her. I wanted that from their relationship, and it could have been a great look at a marriage and the struggles that people face. And she's, you know, Auel still could have had the cheating in it, but just made the ending more convincing, not have this slap, done, finish ending to it when we had like a majority of a book that was pretty boring anyway. So why not have the relationship drama done convincing, and then everybody is happy? Ultimately, even though I wasn't happy with the romantic conclusion, there were a lot of good high moments between the couple and in this series. What did you think of this if you finished it and have thoughts about the romance? Do you agree what I say about Brookerville? Is there someone else that you think that I'm forgetting that Ayla had potential with? Thanks everybody so much for watching my video. I hope this was entertaining. It's a different kind of discussion that I was a little bit scared to do, but I hopefully have done my research enough that this is good and that people have enjoyed it. I'll talk to everybody in my next video. Bye!